What's up, YouTube? If you know anything about me, you know one of the things that I absolutely hate is splicing videos. And so I try my absolute best to keep leagues perfectly intact, and sometimes it doesn't work out that way. And it may or may not be because I started recording at the wrong point and forgot to update where to start. And yeah, so we kind of ran between two different leagues. But I'm going to make up for it. How am I going to make up for it? I'm going to add an extra match to the video so you get 6 matches instead of the normal 5. And we're going to cover 2 different deck lists. So it's going to be a little bit of an amalgamation. You'll be okay. I promise it won't hurt too badly. But we ran through some Sultai Shadow, and we wanted to try out something funky and different, and that came in the form of the card, Kiora Behemoth Beckner. If you've played a lot of Pioneer, you probably run into this card a little bit. It's a staple in the mono green devotion list. Kiora Behemoth Beckner is a 3-mana planeswalker, 2 and a blue-green hybrid, 7 loyalty. 7 loyalty. It's got a static ability. Whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, you draw a card, and then you can -1 loyalty to untap a permanent. So in Pioneer, in the mono green shells, often used to untap and Nykthos to just make extraordinary amounts of mana. In our deck, we're more interested in the static ability, triggering things like Gurmag Angler, Tarmogoyf, Death Shadow to hopefully draw us an extra card. The untap ability, though, is really nice in a deck with such a low land count. Hopefully we can deploy a threat, use Kiora to untap one of our lands, hold up Stubborn Denial or Fatal Push, something like that. Or give one of our threats pseudo-vigilance. We don't have a lot of bodies, so we're not always redeploying more guys out there. So maybe Kiora lets us attack him with a Goyf and then untap it to protect ourselves from a dashed Ragavan or something that might want to attack down our Kiora. So that's what we're giving a shot to today. No idea how it's going to go. Actually, I do because I've already seen the league, but you don't know how it's going to go. So this will be a learning experience for everybody. The 2 lists that I've got, the key difference between them is the first couple matches you're going to see without Street Wraith, and it's going to have access to Giganta. As you can see, Street Wraith is like the only double pip card in the deck, and access to Giganta allows us another 4-mana threat every game that we want it that can trigger Kiora. But it does make Shadows a little bit weaker if we don't have the Wraith, so we might not as reliably hit Shadow big enough to trigger Kiora. But I wanted to see how it felt with and without the Giganta, with and without the Wraith, just to get a little bit of a baseline feel. The rest of the Sultai shell, you could probably pick out a bunch of these cards in a vacuum, like Tarmogoyf, Death Shadow itself, Thoughtseize, Fatal Push, Stubborn Denial, Drown in the Loch, Orcish Bowmaster becoming a staple in just about every Shadow build. The rest of the configuration is kind of leaning towards enabling Gurmag Angler a lot more consistently. So you see the Thought Scours with the Gurmag Anglers. People say Gurmag and Tarmogoyf's and Nombo, but when you're filling your graveyard as much as we are as frequently, plus the fact that our opponent does have a graveyard, it's really not that big of an issue. And Gurmag is absolutely one of the best cheap delve threats that we've got access to. If you want to run Tasigur, I'm sure at this point you know my feelings on the card. I do not think it's worth losing the 1 extra power. But I can see where delving 1 card less might be something you're more interested in. In the sideboard, a couple cards that have overperformed for me out of like Dimir Death Shadow have been Spreading Seas, Dress Down, Turok. We got an extra Fatal Push in here, some Spell Pierces. And then with our Green Splash, we get access to Terra Sunder. We're trying out Tend the Pest as an answer to some of the Solitude decks. With a big delve threat like Gurmag Angler, you're a little bit weaker to getting Solituded or Leyline Binding because now you lose not only a threat, but you lost your graveyard in the delve process. So cards like Tend the Pest let you turn that disadvantage into an advantage by saying, hey, you're going to deal with my Gurmag Angler. Now I've got 5/1/1s. Hope you don't have a Fury. So we'll see how that goes. That's about it for the introduction. Let's go ahead and jump into some of the matches. Remember, like I said, this is spanning 2 different leagues, so we're going to show some matches without the Street Wraith, and then we're going to get into some matches with the Street Wraith, so you'll get to see a little bit of the difference there. We'll see how more or less consistent Shadow is. So, looks like we're up against mURktide, no companion, Spirebluff, Canal, Bauble. We've got some interaction. We've got shadows. We got a redraw, so reasonable hand. Which I will have another video coming up. I played in this past Saturday evening's Modern Challenge with Blue-Red mURktide and ended up top 16 of that one. So I'll have the VOD of that up in case you're wanting to check out some mURktide content. I always talk about like changing things up a little bit, showcasing some other decks. So drawing this Tarmogoyf was really nice. Opponent's got the subtlety for it, but that's kind of okay. We'll just ship it to the bottom. Did I ship it to the bottom? I might have put it on top. No, shipped it to the bottom because I got this triple Death Shadow. I get to add Giganta. I could fetch and shock a Breeding Pool, get a 1/1 Shadow down, and play that, but I don't want my shadows just dying to bolts and heats for no reason. So instead, we'll kind of bait with the Kiora a little bit. Dash Ragavan's fine. I actually meant to put in a second Overgrown Tomb and forgot. So when I went to fetch, I was like, okay, I'll get an Overgrown Tomb. And then I was looking, I was like, oh, I've only got Breeding Pool and Island, so can't do that. But that's okay because opponent's going to be nice enough to get our shadows down, or shadows big enough to tussle a little bit. We just kind of have to hope that their hand's not Ragavan and 3 Unholy Heats. That would be rough. So 1 shadow down, 2 shadow down. Uh-oh. All right, only 2 shadow down, so we're kind of okay for the moment. We could have gotten our shadows up to a 6/6 if we'd waited another turn and happened to know we were drawing this polluted delta. We could have gotten them to 7/7s. Little more risky than I would like to play. But I'm kind of assuming they don't have a counter spell, but I'm going to play this Giganta first just to kind of test. I'd rather have the Giganta resolve than the Fatal Push, but getting the Ragavan off the board is pretty crucial. Now with this Bowmaster, we have the ability to ping ourselves to grow the shadow outside of Unholy Heat range. But it looks like opponent just wants to play the Lightning Bolt game. So Bowmaster would have been lethal ping there. Sideboarding, I do have to be a little careful sideboarding because, like, this is the first time I've played a list like this. I played similar lists, but in the current meta, so there are like a lot of test cards that I'm trying out. So if you see some sideboarding choices that are a little questionable, it might be because I'm trying to bring in some stuff to try out. So in this case, I really wanted to try out Tend the Pest. It's a little bit worse against decks with like a bunch of counter spells, but I just wanted to see how it felt. Haven't played the card in a while. So Tend the Pest coming in. Terra Sunder would normally be one that I bring in because the kick Terra Sunder does deal with the mURktide. It does deal with Blood Moon if you float the mana. It can deal with Unlicensed Hearse, all that stuff. But I kind of wanted to try out these Tend the Pests a little bit more. The one of the Gurmags coming out because Unholy Heat just kind of ruins its entire day. Trimmed on a Kiora, Spell Pierce, Counterspell, especially being on the draw. Pretty big liability. Brought in one of my EEs, but you could very easily like board out a couple more Thoughtseizes, board in the second EE, board in some number of Terra Sunders, and I would not fault you in the slightest for that. But like I said, I wanted to try out some cards, so that's what we're doing. On the draw, thankfully they don't have a Ragavan on turn 1. That would have been much worse for me. But I do have this Bowmaster, so if my opponent's not able to get Delirium online for some reason, then we could potentially Bowmaster down the Channeler. Kind of looked like they were starting to cast another Channeler, which would have been great for me, but unfortunately they do find Delirium. They find Delirium, but we find Tarmogoyf. They find Unholy Heat. Unholy Heat is like one of the most frustrating cards to play against because you're so used to Tarmogoyf being an excellent card against cheap red removal. Like, oh, this dodges Lightning Bolt. For a while there, it would dodge everything like, what's it called? Searing Blaze and Flame Slash and all that stuff. And now it just, like, dies to Unholy Heat. So we got a bunch of Channelers. Opponent drops an EE on 2. That's pretty okay with us because Shadow is Shadow. We attack back, force a chump, get some damage in, take their iteration, and now they're forced to attack with a Channeler, which means even with the EE blowing up the Tarmogoyf, the Death Shadow is lethal on the crackback. So, managed to win, even through a Blood Moon. I do have to really, really stress the Blood Moon considerations. Like, I play a lot of Jund Shadow recently because I think I've got a build that plays really well into Blood Moon, so much so that you can actually afford to run Blood Moon in your own list. And so I'm trying to be considerate with every build that I put together, like how well does this build play into Blood Moon? Because even though Blood Moon is a card that I don't think is particularly good in the current meta, and I say that because, like, at the top of the meta, we've got Scam, that's a Blood Moon deck. mURktide, Rhinos are Blood Moon decks. You've got the Beanstalk decks that can get basics easily and play through Blood Moon. You've got Yawgmoth doesn't really care about Blood Moon. Tron now has access to so many things like Beseiju and Haywire Might that they don't really care about Blood Moon. And yet you still have 3 or 4 Blood Moons at the top of the meta, or 3 or 4 Blood Moon decks. So even if Blood Moon is not great right now, you still have to be able to play through it. Like, you will get cheesed out of a lot of games if you're not proactive into Blood Moon. On to match 2, we are on the draw, but we got a pretty good hand. We've got a lot of stuff to help fill up our graveyard. We've got Thoughtseize into double Shadow. Opponent reveals that they are on a Cascade build. It looks like a Cascade Zoo Beans build. We saw Scion of Draco. We saw Bloodbraid Elf. So my assumption would be it's a build that cycles into Zoo. And after seeing the Striped Riverwinder, I realized it's a Zoo build that I've seen pop up a little bit with, what's his name? The Flare, Soul Flare, and Samut, stuff like that. So it's a pretty cool build. It's definitely off the beaten path a little bit. But it's just trying to get down early Beanstalks and then use things like Scion of Draco, the Flare, Soul Flare, Leyline Binding to trigger your Beanstalks. So, got our opponent for 8 here. We get down Goyf. We need to either find an answer to the Scion, which I don't know if we have any answers to the Scion main deck. Opponent's going to go for the Fury. I Thought Scour in response to try to find something else to the graveyard to grow the Goyf. I don't think it mattered if I thought scoured them or me. Like, they might have more scions, but I also have baubles, so we both have artifacts to hit. They have leyline binding, so I could hit enchantment, but I have planeswalker and Kiora, so it's kind of a wash. Sideboarding against Zoo. Bowmaster's pretty terrible. I realize that they're on a Beanstalk deck, but Bowmaster's still a very underwhelming body, and I don't think the ping for 1 or 2 really matters. And then Thoughtseize I usually trim because even though they're on Beanstalk, they probably have like Beanstalk, Tribal Flames, Kavu maybe to cycle into. And I don't want to be too hyper aggressive with my life total and just die to like a random Tribal Flames or 2. Should have Kiora there because I could have Kiora'd untapped a land and still had like Stubborn Denial up here. But it's not the end of the world. Like getting to drown in the lock a Beanstalk and hold on to my Stubborn Denial is a pretty big deal. Then here we get to kind of do it all. We get to do the thing. We get to Kiora, untap a land, get down Gurmag Angler, have our stub up. Like, we feel happy about this one. Feel like we're real wizards now. An opponent missing their 3rd land drop is super nice for us. Especially when we get to double shadow and draw a couple cards here. Like, how much happier can you be? Let's see. I forgot about this Gem Razor. So, somebody in chat suggested Gem Razor, and I was like, sure, why not? We'll play it. So, that's why it's in the deck. I did 100% forget on this upcoming turn. Or I say forgot. More like just didn't read the card. Didn't know. I thought Gem Razor was an ETB, destroy an artifact or enchantment. So I just hard cast it here. And then realized it's only when you mutate the Gem Razor that it destroys an artifact or enchantment. So I ended up losing out on that disenchant effect because I hard cast it. But we did get to draw a card. We have drawn, I think, 5 cards off this Kiora. No. Gurmag Angler, Shadow, 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 Gem Razor. Drew 6 cards off that Kiora. So that's pretty baller, if I do say so myself. A little bit of a slow hand on the draw. Thankfully, we find a threat, but Fatal Push maybe can take out an early threat out of their side. But if they are just on Scions and Evoke threats, then Fatal Push is pretty bad. But I also saw Samut, and I don't want to assume that they're not on, like, Territorial Kavu. Like, there's a reasonable chance they're not. But I'm kind of terrified of just getting got by one. So Spreading Seas and Dotha Triome. Draw more Fatal Pushes. Not quite where I want to be. But we have cut our opponent off of white and black, which is a very non-zero consideration. And now we've got 4th Fatal Push. So you might think, oh, your opponent's on Scion of Draco and Fury and all that stuff. Like, what are you going to do with 4 copies of Fatal Push? And the answer is, I'm not really sure at the moment. I hadn't thought that far ahead. They've also brought in Unmoored Ego to take my Death Shadow. An opponent commented about the Fatal Pushes right there. They're like, oh, that's some crazy variants. And I was like, yeah, don't remind me. So I had a good chuckle about that. So that's potentially 2 targets for Fatal Push right there. Unfortunately, so I decided to Gurmag Angler, or I decided to Giganta last turn to be mana efficient, because if I played Gurmag Angler and then next turn wanted to Giganta, I'd have to tap all the way out. But if I played Giganta and the next turn Gurmag Angler, I could hold up like all my mana because I'd only need to delve one. And then the Bloodbraid into Endurance was like, well, that punished me royally. And then I messed around with tapping Giganta because Giganta says that you can add one of every color, but you can only use it to pay for non-generic costs. So you can't use it for that 6 on the delve side of Gurmag Angler. You can only use it for the 1 black. But them killing off my Giganta means that I do get to Fatal Push a couple dudes, get enough cards in the yard to Gurmag Angler, and hold up Stubborn Denial. So it's not looking that bad for us. If they have like a Leyline Binding, I can tear asunder it. If they have an Unlicensed Hearse, I can cry a little bit. So opponent goes for a hard cast Fury. Pretty reasonable if we didn't have a potential Gurmag Angler to get back. Like, I could just get the Gurmag back, but I kind of felt like, oh, I get it back, and then it just trades with a Fury, and I don't really want to do that. So maybe instead I start thinking about Tear Asunder to just get rid of the Fury. Like, it's a little sad because I would like the Gurmag Angler, but I also don't want to be dead. And if both results end up with, like, my opponent not having a Fury and me not having a Gurmag Angler, then what's the difference? So we got a Hidetsugu nuking the yard. We got an Unlicensed Hearse that if they ever animate, I've got another Fatal Push. So there's that. Spreading Seas to take out some more white mana. Dress Down also kills an Unlicensed Hearse. And I did have a little bit of a punt on this turn. So they top deck a Samut. And I should have Dress Down on entering combat. But I kind of wanted to make them commit to tapping the Unlicensed Hearse so they wouldn't be able to exile the Wooded Foothills out of the yard. Goyf would get a little bit bigger. And I could still Fatal Push everything. But I ended up taking 2 damage that like I didn't need to take. But either way, we're able to rebuild a Tarmogoyf very, very quickly. We see that they top decked a Fire and Ice. I've got the Stubborn Denial, so that's fine. And we're able to take it in 3. Love to see it. On to match number 3. I think I'll have to check my notes. Yes, match number 3. Got my notes. On the play, Shadow, Wraith, Soft Stub if we need it. One of the hands I really love to see. Our opponent did reveal Kiora, and we see Zagoth Triome and a counter spell. So I'm assuming it's some sort of like 4 or 5 color elemental deck, not a Beanstalk deck. They could have Beanstalk, but I'm assuming it's not like a dedicated Beanstalk deck. And then they shock in Temple Garden, which would lead me to believe, just like this, Leyline Binding, but they can't have Counterspell with the Temple Garden, but they can't have Force of Negation with the Temple Garden, so, you know, damned if you do, damned if you don't. Against Solitude decks, it's pretty important to not be overzealous with your threats here, because if I run out Gurmag Angler, I run the risk of this. My opponent solituding my Gurmag Angler and killing my Shadow as well. But if I stay passive with the Gurmag Angler, hold it back, then I put myself in this position where I get to play out the Gurmag Angler, have access to Stubborn Denial, and not have both of my threats dealt with at once. I could have killed them with the Bowmaster ping plus growing the army token, but I kind of figured like I'm just not going to tap off of any of my mana, because if you have answer into untap Supreme Verdict or something, I just lose. So instead, I'm going to make you untap, have the Supreme Verdict, and then have the Bowmaster to flash in afterwards. Sideboarding against these control piles, basically like Fatal Pushes are coming out. Terra Sunder answers Leyline Binding. If they bring in like Chalice of the Void, it can answer that. You can kick it and deal with a Planeswalker. So pretty versatile card. Usually I'll trim on a Shadow. Maybe trim on a Gurmag if I'm expecting like Path and Teferi and Solitude, because you don't want your graveyard getting nuked multiple times. We do have to remember that our breeding pool is in the yard now, so we only have Overgrown Tomb as a green source left. Thoughtseize gets counterspelled, which means we do get down Goyf. We don't get a Kiora trigger, but I'd rather have the threat resolved. And then we get to do stuff like this, where we Kiora and then untap and Goyf and draw, or Bowmaster and ping, and yeah, stuff. Stuff and things and spells, and our Kiora got prismatic endinged. Pendinged, as some might say. So we'll hold up Drown, because Drown can also answer like a Solitude or something. If I Thoughtseized and I saw maybe 2 answers, then I'd have to decide between Goyf and an actual threat. Or Goyf and holding up Drown, I should say. But yeah, look at that. We got a 6/7 Goyf and we Gurmag, and the Goyf doesn't shrink. That's crazy. Terra Sunder in response to the ring activation, because the ring does check. The way the ring tap works, if you're unsure, it checks last known information. So your opponent resolves a ring. They go to tap it. If you exile it in response to them tapping the ring, then it sees when it's gone, oh, there's no counters on it, so I draw no cards. I still get the protection effect, but no cards are drawn. If you Terra Sunder first and they respond with activating the ring, then they would get to put the counter on it, draw, and then have the ring exiled, so they get that card. So just be careful about that. Also, if your opponent's got like 2 or 3 counters on the ring, let's say they got 3 counters and they go to tap it and you Terra Sunder in response, they do still get to draw 3 cards, because that was the last known information when the ring was exiled. If you had something that removed the counters, though, let's say a Hex Parasite, and they tapped the ring and you responded with remove all the counters, like the 3 counters from it, then the ring trigger would resolve. They would put 1 counter on it, draw 1 card, because that was the last known information. Or if you responded with like Hex Parasite, eat 3 counters, and then Terra Sunder it, then they would draw no cards, because the Hex Parasite would remove the 3 counters. You Terra Sunder, the last known information would be, hey, this had no counters on it when it left. So no card for you. Should have bobbled on my turn there. Not really sure why I didn't, because I would have wanted to potentially draw into like a Drown or something on their turn. I think I was like waiting for them to fetch, and then I was going to bobble afterwards, and they didn't fetch. But either way, go to game 2. We were dead to this double Ren ping, kind of regardless. Game 2, bringing in Spreading Seas to fight the mana, Turok to fight the hand, and the Pro White is very relevant. I know I've seen some people talk about the Pro Red, Pro White Phyrexian Crusader. That used to be a popular option when Blue-White Control was like king of the meta. It's really good on turn 3 on the play. It's really terrible in like every other spot. But But it's got a pretty stacked hand. Solitude, Prismatic Ending, Leyline Binding. But we've got a fish. A zombie fish. And then if they Solitude our zombie fish, then we got a Tarmogoyf. But we're just kind of hoping that they'll start using up cards. Which they do. We're hoping to find another land, which we don't. But even without the land, we know they're down to Pending, Binding, One Ring. We've got a Stubborn Denial for something here, something like that. They do get to Leyline Binding our Goyf, but now they're down to Pending, Unknown. They got a Plains on top. So if we can get some damage in, then perhaps we can get out of this. Mayhaps. Another Tarmogoyf means we've got a lethal threat. We do have to deal with the Leyline Binding, unfortunately. And then they top deck it to Fairy. So you know how it is with these 4-color decks. Like, it's almost always just rip threat into threat into threat. Like, okay, you've got a Teferi, you've got a Leyline. So they ripped Leyline Binding for Goyf into Teferi, bounce Goyf, plus Bolt for the token that would kill the Teferi, into another Prismatic Ending to exile the Goyf. Like, pretty solid string of draws there. But now we know they're drawing into a forest, so we've got Goyf to finish it off. Little extra coverage with our Drown. So when we have situations like that where we're able to kind of regain some of the momentum, we can definitely steal games. But the big key to these matchups is always to not put yourself in a position to get 2-for-1 really badly. So, like, have a threat solituded and lose a shadow in addition, or lose double shadow, something like that. So, round 4 up against Scam. Really great to top deck a Tarmogoyf here. Unfortunately, Bowmaster has, like, changed a lot of the dynamic of these Scam matchups. So usually you would never want to crack a bauble on your turn and draw into a potential Thoughtseize on your opponent's turn. But now that Bowmaster is a card, you have to be more careful about, like, answering or getting that bauble information on your turn if your opponent can't have a Bowmaster on their turn. So maybe if they're empty-handed, or if they've got only 1 mana. But here we get to see the pseudo-vigilance with Kiora, so that's pretty fun. Stubborn Denial and Not Dead after all, so that our Goyf gets to stick around. Trade off with a token pretty aggressively, because if they had another Undying effect, they would have cast it. But I want to grow the Goyf. So another last card is Takenuma. We're just going to keep untapping our Goyf. They actually go for a Grief here, which I thought was kind of not bad, but I just didn't understand why they went for Grief. And then this was also a big mistake. I should have attacked first and then played the Shadow second main, because, like, they're probably going to block with the Bowmaster, not the Grief, right? And if they block with the Grief, then, like, I'm thrilled with that. But that was definitely a mistake. Then I'm going to Thought Scour in response to the Not Dead after all, so that they can't get an extra ping there. Was dead to a Lightning Bolt, but a lot of that just came from me not making that smart attack a couple turns ago. So we did get to kind of run away with that one down the stretch, but it wasn't without a little bit of sketchiness. Sideboarding against Scam. Pretty happy with my sideboard playing against Scam for the most part. Usually just trimming on like some Thought Seizes, Street Wraiths, because it's going to be a long grindy game. I don't want to lower my life total too much unnecessarily. And then I'll trim on some Stubborn Denials, because it's a card that really depends on me having another threat in play. And if I don't have another threat, then it's kind of dead. So, opponent's got 2 cards. I know they've got a Bowmaster, so I don't want to just like throw out the Thought Scour for nothing. Then here we get to land our Kiora. It's got so much loyalty that I might as well just throw it down when I have the opportunity. It's not like our opponent's going to attack into it, and if they want to scam a Fury to take care of it, deal. And then we go for the Thought Scour on our turn so that I can draw safely without a Bowmaster trigger. And now we're just looking for a little extra stuff to do, which Kiora untapping our mana is actually very relevant here. We get an extra Thought Scour out. Unfortunately, they do find a Thought Seize for our 10 the Pests, which I would have loved to have. Thought Scour in the off chance that we're able to find something. I don't know what, but something. And then this is kind of one of those situations where I would love access to Giganta. Because just having another thing that you can add, play out, draw off the Kiora, trade with a Fury. Like, that would be pretty nice. But we'll take a Gurmag Angler. Then there's the Bowmaster finally. Go ahead and kill off this Fury. So we do have a better board than our opponent at the moment. Obviously, if they have another Fury, if they've got a Terminate, something like that, it can be really rough for us. I'll Terminate. Yeah, we'll scoop to the double Bowmaster. We're not dead to it, but I just don't have anything that can deal with them going wide. I've thought about recently adding some number of like Flaying Tendrils or Languish or something to the sideboard just to be able to deal with decks going wide a little bit, but it's not something I'm like hugely interested in. Get to rip a Blood Moon on one, get a Goyf down that outgrows everything. They'd have to find another red card to be able to evoke the Fury and kill the Goyf. Instead, they find another Undying Effect and a Grief, which I'm much happier with because, hey, I've got a 6/7 Goyf to your 4/3 Grief. Now I've got a 6/7 Goyf and a potential 4/4 Shadow. Dothy's pretty solid. We'll give them a bobble. If they want to take that, they're more than welcome to it. Play out Shadow. So I'm basically dead to Bolt. Fatal Push gives us a way of dealing with Grief. So we start with the Thoughtseize. They immediately go for the Undying Effect. We respond with the Fatal Push. And we have a lethal attack coming through. Nice. So one of the things I am really noticing in these early matches is we are very weak to things that don't die to Fatal Push. So Furies, Scion of Draco, mURktide would be pretty rough against. So I probably want some number of like Infernal Grasp or something in the Giganta builds. Maybe Dismember in the non-Giganta builds. Like, I really, really like Dismember. Not only for growing shadows, but just being a 1-mana answer to stuff. So, up against another Zoo opponent, but this is not one of the Beanstalk variants. This is just, I say normal Zoo, Domain Zoo. Cared more about Tribal Flames, Neshoba Brawler, Territorial Kavu. all that fun stuff. We would love to find some more lands, but got to work with what you got to work with. Kavu's solid. Looks like opponent's going to try to get in a cheeky point of damage here. Probably means they have a lightning bolt and they're just trying to get the game over with. So we're going to kill off that token before it connects. So I was expecting lightning bolt, but I think I knew they had stubborn denial Giganta. So I think that was a little overly dramatic. Like they top deck. Oh no, they did have lightning bolt. Okay, so yeah, we called the lightning bolt. I don't know where I thought they had stubborn denial. Maybe they discarded it to Kavu or something. But either way, we've kind of already talked about sideboarding against the other zoo build. Sideboarding really doesn't change much between the two. Terra Sunder, I think, is really, really good because it deals with not only Scion of Draco, but Leyline Binding, like Hidetsugu, Rest in Peace, Engineered Explosives. You can kick it and deal with any other threat that comes out. Just a very flexible card. Get down a couple Gentlemen. Deals with Chain to the Rocks. Opponent's got another copy of Scion of Draco. I shouldn't have fetched and shocked there. I should have just attacked and then played the Kiora second main phase. There wasn't really like a reason to fetch and shock. I just put myself dead to this Scion for like no reason. The extra damage didn't really matter. So that was definitely a punt on my part. For some reason, I was thinking like, oh, I need the extra damage. Did not need the extra damage. But what I am noticing between these two builds, and I'm going to have the links to both builds in the description, both the Street Wraith list and the non-Street Wraith list. But what I'm kind of noticing is the Street Wraith list, as we expected, more explosive, but I don't think Street Wraith itself is doing a ton that we care about. I think I would rather those Wraiths just be like real cantrips. Maybe preordain, maybe consider. Like, Thought Scour's been pretty decent, but it is fairly random. So maybe I want to change that up a little bit. Spreading Seas has been pretty nice. Get to knock out Savai Triumph here. So for a couple turns, we took them off both red and white, which in a deck full of Territorial Kavus, Leyline Bindings, Chained to the Rocks, is a pretty big deal. We know they have a Stubborn Denial, so they'll probably get to answer this dress down at some point. I think that means I should have just gone ahead and cast the dress down. I was kind of thinking maybe they throw away the stub because, hey, stub doesn't do anything against a board full of guys that are just like bigger than what I've got. But opponent held true to their convictions and did not throw away the Stubborn Denial. But they did throw away the Kavu, which is kind of weird because they're like, hey, I've got a Stubborn Denial. I've got this Hard Negate. Let me throw away the creature that's turning it on. So, always fun here. Opponent goes for a Leyline Binding. After blocks, we get to bobble ourselves and see a Stubborn Denial, which means we can Thought Scour them to draw into the Stubborn Denial. And then if they had like an answer to the Thought Scour, then we could dress down into the Stubborn Denial. And one way or another, we get in that Stubborn Denial. And then here we are on to match number 6. Like I said, we're going to have a nice little bonus match this league. Since I'm not very good at determining where to start a video. But more scam. As you know, if you've been playing a bunch of modern leagues recently, like 75% of the field is scam, it feels like. If you don't have a good matchup against scam or a solid game plan, then you're going to run into some amount of trouble. So we got a Bowmaster in response to an EOT Thought Scour. But we've got a push for the Bowmaster. So we're feeling pretty decent. We'll get Shadow down, plus have a Drown in the Lockup. Like, a little bad if they've got a Fury. Grief is fine-ish. But a Grief with no Undying, and then trade off Bowmaster for the token. Stub's okay, but we really need like an actual threat to go with our stub. This is absolutely another one of those times that I would like to have access to Giganta, because having another like 5 toughness, 5 power threat that enables stubborn denial that you can just like grab on over would be a pretty big deal. But we've got Thoughtseize into Shadow into Stubborn Denial, so feel pretty reasonable here. We've got Unknown Undying Evil. We can fetch and shock if we want to make this a 2-turn clock. Opponent's got a Ragavan, which we smartly held the army token back to fight against that. And then this was a huge punt on my part. I know they have the Undying effect. I should have just let this go, let them have the block, and gone to their turn with Stubborn Denial and just taken that. That is like one extra turn it would take to kill them, but kind of like a push turn. Like they drew dead, essentially. But I didn't. I Stubborn Denial the Undying effect and let them top deck a Terminate into a Fable and just kind of like threw this game over a play that I didn't need to make. So I talk about it all the time in Dimir and really did not follow my own advice here of like recognizing when to counter things, when not to counter things. Like, don't counter it because it just doesn't matter. Like, that Ragavan's not attacking into me unless they top deck exactly another Bowmaster to kill my token. That would be punishing, but me losing my Shadow, I think, is bigger than them, like, hitting a Bowmaster and hitting me once with Ragavan. Already talked about scam sideboarding a bit, like some Wraiths coming out. Thoughtseizes, I try to keep all the Thoughtseizes in on the play because a turn 1 Thoughtseize to disrupt like an Undying situation is pretty big. So we take their Ragavan. They had Fury, so if they were able to find another red card, they could have Undying to Fury right there. Instead, they just rip a couple back-to-back Thoughtseizes and a red card. Or they had a Thoughtseize. They ripped a red card and another Thoughtseize. So, Fury could be an issue. If we find a Shadow, we're kind of okay. Say kind of okay, like very, very meekly. So I decided to save up some life, get just basics instead, untap a Thought Scour. I'm kind of hoping to just fog a turn by having them swing at Kiora, but they go for me instead, which is like okay if I find a Shadow or any threat really. Or I find a Terrace Under, and thanks to Kiora's untap, I can kick it and take out Fury that way. So that's pretty dope for Kiora. Kiora into Goyf. Like, okay. We're doing stuff. Push a Bowman so they don't get an extra ping. Decided not to untap anything with Kiora. I don't think there's really a reason to bluff. So they're drawing into a Black Cleave Cliffs. I've got a 2-turn clock, so we're going to ping down the token, attack in with our Tarmogoyf. We know they're drawing dead. So I think I end up just untapping with Kiora for the moral victory. And get to go on to game 3. Game 3 against Scam for more than any hypothetical marbles. Really slow hand, not very good, but I don't want a mulligan. And I figure if they've got a turn 1 Scammed Grief or a turn 1 Thoughtseize, then I'm a little resilient against that. I really wasn't thinking about Thoughtseize into Dauthi too hard. Maybe I should have, but sometimes that's just how it goes. So we get Goyf down, take a hit, and unfortunately we are not going to be able to get down a third Gurmag Angler, let alone a second, let alone a first. So we'll dress down. I know that it shrinks the Goyf, but I kind of want to just take the chump, get some extra cards to the yard to be able to get down a Gurmag Angler. Like something that doesn't die to Fury. I don't know what I could draw to get out of this, but so help me, we're going to find it. If we had that Languish here would be pretty nutty. But unfortunately we don't. So we're going to die to Dauthi there. That's the second or third game in the recent past that I've died to just like a multitude of Dauthis. So I kind of need to revisit my scam plan a little bit. Like I said earlier, we have a big issue with early threats, and I really want to find a couple extra pieces of spot removal to help out with those. But ultimately, like, I think the list is cool. I don't think Kiora is a replacement for a Beanstalk. I don't think Kiora is a replacement for a Beanstalk in terms of card generation, but we did see a variety of different ways that it was actually like somewhat useful, whether it be drawing cards, untapping threats, untapping lands to give a little extra mana. We saw like being able to untap for the Terrace Under kick on the Fury, untapping a Goyf for vigilance, untapping lands to be able to hold up extra pieces of permission. So it was pretty flexible. A lot more flexible than I thought it would be. So yeah, give it a shot if you think it's an idea that could be interesting. I don't know about the threat base. I didn't really have a problem with Gurmag Angler plus Goyf in any of the games that kind of played out normally. But there was a big issue when our opponent had Grave Hate of not only shutting off Goyf, but shutting off Gurmag Angler as well. Drown in the Lock could have been awkward at times. Tend the Pest, I wanted to be better, but we just never had like a great opportunity to cast it. So it's probably not the Solitude answer that I want, but it's at least there. We can think about it. Anything else? I think that's about it. Like Thought Scour. If I was going to be pressed to make changes, first off, I would keep the Giganta build instead of the Street Wraiths. I think that having that extra body that triggers Kiora was very important. And I don't think the 2 life loss off the Wraith mattered all that much. I would swap out Thought Scour for a better cantrip, like Preordain or Consider, something like that. Like, I get enabling Gurmag Angler, but if your opponent doesn't nuke your graveyard, we're kind of enabling Gurmag Angler fine anyway with Bobble, some sort of cantrip, our threats, fetch lands. And then, so if you took out the 4 Wraith, the 4 Thought Scour, maybe like 1 Gurmag Angler, you swapped in 4 Preordains or Considers, and you had 3 or 4 more slots, I'd probably devote those more to interaction. Like, I really like the main deck Terra Sunder out of Jund. I'd probably do that here. Maybe find room for, I think I'd mentioned Infernal Grasp, something like that. Or, I don't know if there's another value play we can make. I'm sure somebody will suggest jamming Jace Friends Prodigy. If that's your thing, go for it. But it's not really my thing, so I'm going to stay away from that one. But hope y'all enjoyed the video. Like I said, I'll have a link to the deck list down below, as well as a link to the Cntrlfreak Discord if you want to come talk about this list and other shadow lists or non-shadow lists. I'm going to be posting a video of the top 16 challenge run with Is It mURktide sometime in the near future. Have a link to the Twitter down below if you want to know whenever a stream's going live. That's the first place it gets updated. Link to the Twitch account down below, so if you want to come check out a live stream. And yeah, that's about it. Hope y'all have words are tough. Hope all of y'all have a fantastic rest of your day. Stay safe. Enjoy some good food and company. I will catch y'all back live later. Adios for now.